What if I told you that for many women, the fairy tale ending of a wedding was the beginning of a lifetime of imprisonment within gilded walls? We are accustomed to seeing dazzling beauties in silk and diamonds in old portraits, whose lives seem to us to be the epitome of prosperity and carefree existence. But behind the heavy velvet curtains of the luxurious mansions of Fifth Avenue and Newport lay a silence filled with despair, loneliness, and total control. The Gilded Age created a world where women were nothing more than precious decorations in the living room, deprived of the right to vote, desires, and even their own bedrooms. In these huge museum-like houses, brides lost their names, becoming obedient shadows of their powerful husbands. Watch the video to the end to find out how the invisible chains of etiquette and husband's authority prove stronger than any prison bars. Want to know a secret that will change your perception of the romance of the past? Marriage in high society at the end of the 19th century often resembled not a union of two loving hearts, but a merger of large industrial corporations. Young girls raised in strictness and ignorance became bargaining chips in the games of ambitious parents seeking to consolidate their capital. No one asked for their opinion when, behind closed doors, their fathers signed marriage contracts that were more like sales agreements. The groom could be decades older, have a difficult personality or a bad reputation, but none of that mattered in the face of financial gain. Preparing for the wedding turned into an endless series of fittings, visits, and displays of dowry, where the bride herself was just a mannequin. She stood for hours while seamstresses pinned meters of precious lace on her, feeling her freedom shrink with every stitch. Those around her admired her future happiness, not noticing the cold fear in her eyes in the face of the unknown. Instead of words of comfort, her mother reminded her of her duty to her family and the need to maintain their high status. On her wedding day, walking down the aisle in a heavy dress embroidered with pearls, she felt hundreds of appraising glances from the guests. It was not a sacrament of union of souls, but a public transfer of ownership from father to husband. The priest uttered words of submission that sounded like a sentence for a living and feeling soul. After the ceremony, the doors of the mansion closed, cutting her off from her former life, her friends, and her dreams. Sometimes, looking in the gilded mirror, she could hardly recognize in this majestic lady the cheerful girl she had been just yesterday. A mask of calm and dignity grew on her face, hiding her inner emptiness and longing. She learned to smile at receptions when she wanted to scream and to make small talk when her heart was aching. It was the art of survival in a world where sincerity was considered bad form. Over time, she began to perceive herself as part of the interior, as expensive and silent as the Chinese vases in the hall. Her task was to adorn her husband's life and not cause him any inconvenience. Any displays of character or disagreement were gently but firmly suppressed with reference to propriety. Thus, her personality died, giving way to the ideal image of a society lady. We are very interested in hearing your point of view. What do you think? Was such wealth worth the loss of personal freedom and the right to vote? Write about it in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new stories about the hidden sides of a great era. Are you ready to learn the truth about how these grand houses were designed? The layout of the mansions of the Gilded Age was designed not for comfort, but to demonstrate status and divide people. The vast spaces of the halls and ballrooms were created to overwhelm people with their grandeur, making them feel small and insignificant. The private quarters of the spouses were often located in different wings of the building, which made their meetings rare and formal. Between the husband's and wife's bedrooms, there could be long corridors, enfilades of rooms, and staircases that had to be traversed. The female half of the house, the boudoir and bedroom, became her only refuge. But even there, she was not alone. These rooms were cluttered with heavy furniture, carpets, and statuettes, which created a feeling of crampedness and stuffiness. The windows were often covered with thick curtains to protect the upholstery from the sun, creating a perpetual twilight. In this gilded cage, women spent most of their days preparing to go out or resting from it. The garden and greenhouse could have been a place of relaxation, but even there, everything was subject to geometry and order. The trees were trimmed, the paths were measured, and every step on the gravel could be heard from the windows of the house. Even the nature around the mansion was tamed and confined, allowing no freedom or wildness. A walk in the garden was like walking on a parade ground, where one had to keep one's back straight and conform to the landscape. The staircases in these houses were a separate challenge. Wide, marble, slippery, requiring special attention when descending in a long dress. They served as a stage for ceremonial appearances, but in everyday life, they became insurmountable obstacles. Climbing them alone, a woman felt the full weight of her situation. The house was built for receptions and balls, but was completely unsuited to simple human happiness. Ultimately, the mansion became not a fortress, but a labyrinth in which it was easy to get lost and disappear. The silk-covered walls muffled cries, and the closed shutters hid tears from prying eyes. How do you think women coped with the physical discomfort caused not only by the architecture, but also by their own clothing? What you never saw was hidden under layers of silk and velvet. Women's clothing of that era was a true engineering feat, designed to constrain the body and subject it to unnatural standards. The corset, tightly laced from early morning, was not just underwear, but a rigid frame that compressed the ribs and internal organs. It prevented women from breathing deeply, forcing them to breathe shallowly and frequently, which often led to fainting. A woman in a corset was physically unable to bend over, relax, or make any sudden movements. Numerous petticoats, bustles, and pads were worn over the corset to create a fashionable silhouette. The total weight of a formal dress could reach 10 to 15 kilograms, which had to be worn all day long. It was a constant physical strain that exhausted the fragile female body by evening. Every movement required effort, turning a simple walk across the room into an endurance exercise. The sleeves of dresses were often cut so narrowly that it was impossible to raise your arms above your shoulders. This made women dependent on the help of a maid even for the simplest tasks, such as combing their hair. They could not fasten the endless rows of buttons on their backs themselves, becoming hostages to their own attire. Their clothing literally dictated a posture of submission and limited movement. The fabrics were heavy, dense, and often stiff: velvet, brocade, satin with thick lining. In summer, such dresses were unbearably hot, and in winter they did not provide enough warmth due to the open shoulders in evening gowns. The body beneath these layers rotted and itched, but it was impossible to scratch without disrupting the perfect smoothness of the silhouette. It was torture by beauty, lasting from the moment of awakening until late at night. She changed clothes several times a day: morning attire, a dress for walks, a tea dress, a dress for dinner, a ball gown. Her whole life turned into an endless process of dressing and undressing. She had no time to just be herself. She was constantly preparing for her next appearance. Clothes were her uniform, her work clothes, in which she played the role of the perfect wife. It is not surprising that many women of that era suffered from constant fatigue and ailments. Their bodies rebelled against this violence, responding with illness and weakness. Like this, if you sympathize with these prisoners of fashion, and subscribe to the channel to learn more about the lives of women throughout history. In the next chapter, you will learn how social life turned into hard labor. Want to know a secret that will change your life and your perception of entertainment? What we tend to think of as leisure time was, for women of high society, exhausting, mandatory work. The social calendar was scheduled down to the minute, and any deviation from it threatened a loss of reputation and status. Every day, a lady had to make a certain number of visits, leaving calling cards at the homes of acquaintances. It was a complex system of debts and credits of politeness that had to be kept with accounting precision. Sitting in a carriage jolting over cobblestones, she visited dozens of addresses, often without even leaving the carriage, but simply handing her card to the footman. If the visit required her personal presence, she had to engage in the same empty conversations about the weather and mutual acquaintances. She could not show fatigue, boredom, or bad mood. Her face had to express kindness and interest. This required tremendous emotional tension and acting skills. Receptions and balls, which lasted until late at night, were not a source of joy, but a battlefield for her husband's influence and connections. A woman had to remember the names, titles, and family ties of everyone present in order to avoid any mistakes. One wrong glance, one untimely word could cause a scandal and ostracism. She stood for hours in high heels, greeting guests, smiling at everyone until her feet went numb with pain. 12-course dinners were a test for the stomach and nerves, where every sip and movement of the fork had to be monitored. The corset prevented her from eating normally, and the close attention of her table neighbors did not allow her to relax. She had to entertain the men sitting next to her with conversation, laugh at their jokes, and flatter their egos. It was the work of a diplomat, psychologist, and geisha all at once, unpaid and unappreciated. Social life sucked all her energy, leaving no time for reading, creativity, or communing with her own thoughts. A woman became a function, a beautiful mechanism for maintaining social connections. In the evening, returning to her bedroom, she would collapse from exhaustion, only to start all over again in the morning. It was a rat race from which there was no escape except old age or death. Do you think it was fair to place the entire burden of social obligations solely on women's shoulders? Now imagine that even in her own home, she was not in charge of the money. In a world of outward luxury, women often found themselves in a humiliating position of financial dependence, without a penny of their own. Even if she brought a huge dowry into the marriage, after the wedding it was completely transferred to her husband's control. The laws of the time effectively deprived married women of property rights, making them perpetual minors. She lived in a palace but could not buy herself a pair of gloves without her husband's permission. Husbands often gave their wives so-called pin money, small amounts for minor expenses. They had to account for every coin spent, presenting receipts and explaining the necessity of the purchase. This turned an adult woman into a child begging for pocket money from a strict parent. Many of New York's wealthiest ladies were forced to secretly borrow from dressmakers or sell old dresses. If a husband was stingy or wanted to punish his wife, he could completely cut off her funding. She could not leave him because she had no means of support and nowhere to go. Financial control was the most reliable tool for keeping a woman obedient. She could wear a necklace worth a fortune around her neck, but not have enough money for a postage stamp. The gifts her husband gave her were often investments in his own image rather than expressions of love. Jewelry, furs, thoroughbred horses, all of these belonged to him and demonstrated his success. In the event of divorce or quarrel, he could take it all back, leaving his wife with nothing. She was merely a temporary custodian of his treasures, a showcase for his capital. The inheritance received by a woman also often fell into the hands of her husband, unless a special marriage contract had been drawn up. He could gamble away her fortune, invest it in a risky venture, or spend it on his mistress. She was powerless to prevent the ruin that affected her directly. The law protected the interests of men, leaving women defenseless. The lack of economic freedom was the foundation on which patriarchal power in the family was based. Women knew that without their husbands, they were nothing in this material world. This knowledge forced them to endure coldness, betrayal, and neglect for the sake of a roof over their heads. The golden cage was locked, and the key to it was in their husband's wallet. Financial dependence was difficult, but medical dependence was even worse. In the next chapter, you will learn how doctors helped husbands subdue rebellious wives. Are you ready for the shocking truth about how medicine was used to control women? Any display of discontent, sadness, or desire for independence was often attributed to women's nerves or hysteria. Doctors, being men of the same circle, always sided with the husband, confirming his authority with the authority of science. If a woman cried too often or refused to perform her marital duties, she was declared ill. The most common method of treatment was the so-called rest cure, developed by Dr. Weir Mitchell. The woman was locked in a room and forbidden to get out of bed, read, write, or even talk. She was force-fed, isolated from her children and friends, and turned into a passive vegetable. This treatment could last for weeks or months, breaking the patient's will and driving her to true insanity. This method was an ideal way to get rid of an inconvenient wife without resorting to a scandalous divorce. While she lay in a darkened room, her husband could live a free life, entertain guests, and manage his affairs. Deprived of intellectual stimulation and communication, the woman quickly lost touch with reality. She began to believe that she was indeed ill and that her husband was her only savior. The medicines prescribed to women often contained opium, morphine, or laudanum. These drugs were addictive and turned women into quiet drug addicts, dozing in their boudoirs. They dulled pain and longing, but also killed the will to resist and clarity of thought. A drugged wife was convenient. She didn't ask questions, make scenes, or demand attention. Many brilliant minds and talents faded away in these stuffy bedrooms under the supervision of nurses. Women who could have become writers, artists, or public figures were broken by a diagnosis of hysteria. Their unspent energy, finding no outlet, truly destroyed them from within. It was a tragedy of an entire generation lost in the labyrinth of pseudoscience. How much do you think the fear of such treatment influenced women's behavior in the family? Now let's see how the fear of public opinion was no less powerful than the fear of doctors. Reputation in high society was as fragile as crystal, and once broken, it could not be restored. For a woman of the Gilded Age, the worst thing was to become the subject of gossip and rumors in salons. Any careless step, glance, or rumor could forever close the doors of respectable homes to her. Fear of public opinion was the invisible corset that restrained her behavior more tightly than any law. Living under the scrutiny of hundreds of eyes required constant self-control and hypocrisy. A woman had no right to make mistakes, show weakness, or display passion in public. Even if her husband openly cheated on her, she had to hold her head high and pretend that nothing was happening. A public scandal or divorce was tantamount to social death, after which only exile remained. Society ruthlessly punished those who violated the unwritten rules of propriety. A divorced woman was no longer accepted, her name was crossed off guest lists, and old friends turned away when they met her. She became persona non grata, an outcast in a world of luxury and glamour. This fear forced women to endure years of abuse and humiliation in marriage, just to maintain the appearance of well-being. Blackmail and intrigue were commonplace in this environment, where everyone knew everything about everyone else. Servants, maids, and footmen often became sources of information that could be used against their mistresses. A single lost letter or overheard conversation could become a weapon in the hands of ill-wishers. Women lived in constant tension, fearing that their secrets would become public knowledge. Outward perfection was the only defense against gossip. Perfect hair, perfect dress, perfect manners. This was the armor that hid vulnerability. Women expended enormous effort to create and maintain this facade, behind which often lay emptiness. They played the role of happy wives and mothers, even if in their hearts they hated both their husbands and their lives. Gossip could destroy not only the woman herself, but also the future of her children, especially her daughters. A stain on a mother's reputation automatically cast a shadow on her daughter's chances of marrying well. This responsibility to their children forced women to be doubly cautious and submissive. They sacrificed their own happiness so as not to ruin the lives of the next generation. Living in fear of condemnation turned women into each other's overseers. They themselves became the strictest judges, vigilantly monitoring compliance with the norms. This circular bond of fear cemented the system, preventing anyone from escaping the golden cage. Everyone was both a victim and an executioner in this theater of propriety. Scandal was the abyss on the edge of which every society lady balanced. One wrong step and the fall was inevitable and final. But there were also those who were brought to these mansions from across the ocean, and their fate was even sadder. A particular tragedy of the era was the fate of the so-called dollar princesses. Wealthy American heiresses married off to impoverished European aristocrats. Their parents, nouveau riche, craved titles and coats of arms to establish themselves in high society, while European dukes and counts needed money to repair their castles. The girls became living checks to pay for the leaky roofs of ancestral estates in England and France. The most striking example was Consuelo Vanderbilt, whose mother literally forced her to marry the Duke of Marlborough. The girl cried all night before the wedding because she was in love with someone else, but her pleas were ignored. Her dowry saved Blenheim Palace, but she found herself in a cold foreign country, in a loveless marriage. She became a duchess, but lost the right to her own happiness and homeland. Longing for home, for America, for familiar faces became their constant companion. Letters took weeks to arrive, and visits from relatives were rare occasions. They lived in golden cages with crowns on their heads, dreaming of a simple walk in Central Park. Their titles sounded grand, but behind them lay a quiet female tragedy. Many of these marriages ended in scandalous divorces or years of separation. Money could not buy love, and titles could not replace emotional warmth. These women brought billions of dollars to Europe, but in return received only the cold glitter of family jewels. They were the richest and most unhappy brides of their time. Their stories were often presented in newspapers as fairy tales about Cinderellas who had found their princes. But in reality, the princes turned out to be cynical fortune hunters, and the palaces were uncomfortable barracks. The glossy picture hid tears and disappointment that were not talked about. The dollar princesses were victims of their parents' ambitions. They built schools and hospitals and restored villages in an attempt to find meaning in their lives. Their charity work was an attempt to fill the void in their hearts, but in history they remained only a list of names and sums in marriage contracts. Even in their own homes, they were constantly watched by those whom they often did not notice. In huge mansions, the illusion of privacy was the biggest lie. The house was filled with an army of servants, footmen, maids, cooks, housekeepers, dozens of eyes that saw and heard everything. A woman was never truly alone. Behind every door and every corridor, there could be a servant. She lived in a glass house where her every step, sigh, or letter read became the property of the servants. The servants knew more about their mistress than her own husband or mother. They washed her underwear, cleaned her bedroom, served her breakfast in bed, and saw her in her most intimate moments. They knew when she cried, what medications she took, and who sent her flowers. This forced intimacy with strangers deprived the woman of her sense of security. The loyalty of servants often belonged to the person who paid their wages. That is, the husband. Many maids and valets spied on their mistresses at the behest of their masters, reporting on her every move. This created an atmosphere of paranoia, where a woman was afraid to say a word too many in her own boudoir. She could not trust those who dressed her and combed her hair. Discussing the masters was the main entertainment in the kitchen and the servants' quarters. Gossip about quarrels, infidelities, and habits of the masters spread instantly throughout the city through the network of servants from other houses. Secrets that a woman tried to hide became known to the cook of a neighboring mansion before her friends. The reputation of the mistress was in the hands of those whom she often did not even know by name. Sometimes a strange, unequal friendship developed between the mistress and her personal maid, based on the loneliness of both. But this bond was always fragile and could be broken at any moment at the whim of the husband. The maid could be dismissed, and the mistress would lose the only person she could talk to. Life under surveillance turned the house into a panopticon, where the observer was invisible but omnipresent. And even when the husband died, the control did not disappear, but took on new forms. The death of a husband should have brought liberation, but often it was the beginning of a new phase of restrictions. The status of widow imposed even stricter obligations on a woman than the status of wife. Mourning was not simply an expression of grief, but a complex social ritual scheduled for years to come. A woman had to dress in plain black, hiding herself under layers of crepe and veils. The first year of mourning, deep mourning, prohibited any appearances in public except for church. A woman became a recluse in her own home, draped in black. She was not allowed to receive guests, listen to music, or even read entertaining books. She had to demonstrate her inconsolability to the world, even if she felt relief in her heart. A widow's clothing was a kind of shroud for a living person. The black matte fabric, the absence of shine and decoration, the long veil covering her face, all this erased her individuality. She turned into a black silhouette, a shadow gliding through the streets. Any bright spot in her clothing was considered disrespectful to the memory of the deceased. Her husband's will often continued to control her life, even from the afterlife. Many husbands left their fortunes in trust to banks or guardians, fearing that their widows would remarry and the money would leave the family. She could only receive interest without access to the principal. The financial noose remained around her neck, only now it was held by lawyers. Often the will contained a condition. If the widow remarried, she would lose all her money and the right to live in the mansion. This presented her with a cruel choice: loneliness in wealth, or love in poverty. Even after death, men did not want to let go of their property, dictating the terms of her existence. Children, especially sons, often took their father's place as controllers of their mother when they came into their inheritance. An adult son could dictate where she lived, who she associated with, and how she spent her money. Power simply passed from one man to another, leaving the woman in a dependent position. She became a guest in the house she considered her own. In the end, many of them remained in these mansions until their deaths, becoming living ghosts of a bygone era. They wandered through dusty halls, remaining faithful to the shadows of the past. Brides who entered these doors young and full of hope left them only feet first, never knowing what true freedom was. We walked through the corridors of time, peeking behind the closed doors of the richest mansions of the past. We saw that the glitter of gold and the sparkle of diamonds often hid tears, fear, and endless loneliness. These women, whose names grace the society columns, paid a terrible price for their status, the price of their own identity and freedom. Their lives were beautiful decorations for a play written by men, where they were assigned the role of silent extras. The history of the Gilded Age is not only a history of capital and progress, but also a history of millions of invisible tragedies that played out in the silence of luxurious bedrooms. What echoes of that era and that attitude towards women can be found in the modern world? Suggest topics for future videos in the comments, and tell us what other forgotten pages of women's history you would like to learn about. Subscribe to the channel so that we can uncover the secrets of the past and understand the present together.